going to provide us a wonderful 3-day workshop. But due to the rise in COVID infections and the risk of traveling, we decided to be cautious and postpone this workshop. And that workshop has been rescheduled for June of 2022. So today I see as sort of a mini preview of the workshop that will be occurring next June. And Iain next June will also be doing a live demonstration for us. Just a little introduction about Iain. Iain's an award-winning watercolor artist and instructor and frequent juror. He is a signature member of the American and National Watercolor Societies, and he's a member of the Whiskey Painters of America. If you haven't heard of them, maybe Iain can tell you about them. He has received numerous awards for his work, and he's been published in many books and journals. But most recently, he published his own book through Walter Foster Publisher. It is called Plein Air, Light and Color, and it has just been released in the last month. Iain is an architect by trade. He is an architectural illustrator, and he is still an adjunct professor at the Auburn University School of Architecture in Alabama. Iain says the foundation of his work, architecture is the foundation that drives how he thinks about composition and design for each painting. And I think we're going to get a little demonstration today of how, of Iain's process, how he approaches a painting, and how that architectural background informs his decisions in painting. So I'm really, really excited to have Iain here. And for the next hour and a half, it's all yours, Iain. Welcome.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. And it's an honor to be here in my studio. And I've always thought sort of the one thing about this whole Zoom aspect is everybody actually gets to come into my studio where I work every day. And that's something that's pretty unique. So I'm just going to jump right in and talk to you a little bit about how I plan and what I do before we get into the demonstration itself. A lion's share of the work that I do on site is in my sketchbook, just for pure simplicity of carrying. It's lightweight. I don't need a full palette, and I can set up and paint something. This little view to Manhattan from Brooklyn that's a 10-minute painting. So each of these are, if you just grab a coffee and sit down. These ones are a little bit longer, but still done on site, and they just. So I think about when I travel, it's not how many paintings I can get done or how good they are, but it's much more about how many memories can I collect. I find this, if you sit down and you just look at where you are, you will observe on a higher level. And this combined with your site photography just reinforces the sense of being there. So I'll just show you, I do a lot of these little thumbnails and things like that. And this is a little view. We have a farm that we are actually in the process of selling. And anything, by the way, is game for me to paint. So this is behind a restaurant downtown. And I just thought the organization of the electrical boxes and whatnot looked interesting. So, and then I'll also do little studies from photographs or paint live on my back porch, that sort of thing. So this is where all the ideas come together. And see if there's anything. This is a pretty good page that sort of shows you my thinking process is there's the whole scene. Then I start to focus in on the midgrounds. And then I'm starting to look at the geometry of these houses in the foreground. And then I start to apply all of that so that it's the more information I have before I begin painting, the better. And in doing so, I can also concentrate a lot more on edge control and letting things bleed and, pulling off little lifts and stuff like that. So this page informs what I do here. And it starts to give me ideas. Quite often I'll write things, and just little instructions and stuff like that. So this is done on site in Nice. And it's the other sketchbook that I need to show you now. So I decided to do this little painting of New York. So this is looking down 9th towards Grace Church. And what I've done here is I've taken a sort of an architect's, this is called a sign pan, and it makes really big marks to show you that, if I wanted, if I want to capture the essence of this, then I have to start beginning to ask myself a few questions. A, what is needed? Do I need all these cabs, and do I need the bus? Can I look at this in a different way and begin to crop, thinking about things? But then remember, once you crop, you still have to keep in mind where your center lines are and how that is going to affect your composition. So for me, in this particular one, the buildings behind the steeple, they're not really doing anything for me compositionally. So I just decided to take them out. And this is me just sort of fooling around with, could I sneak the Empire State Building in and would anybody notice? So I do that kind of play quite a bit. And that frees me up because I can approach it from a sense that I'm going to paint what I feel rather than be too beholden to what's actually going on. So I'm looking for simple shapes like these little banners, these large awnings that are always over New York City streets, and that's just to catch construction debris. But I think most of all, the thing you want to think about, and there's a little sun, is the direction of light and how that's going to affect your composition. So I want to give the idea that the side of this church is just being blasted by early morning light. Or, if we look at it, early morning light would be coming in there. So we're maybe at about 7 or something in the morning. But what that also does in a city like New York, where it's these big, concrete canyons, is it allows light to slip through between the buildings. So we could imagine it, if I wanted to, I could add another layer of light here. There's no rule that says I don't, that I can't do that. The thing I would say, though, to keep in mind is you want that to be placed in a way that it's going to make sense compositionally. So that's why I just put that underneath this construction dumpster. And I never let these things, I don't let a very simple but colorful shape go to waste in my paintings typically. That's something that says New York, you see it all the time. And it's an easy shape. So in going through this, I'll use some terminology that might help express what I'm talking about. But when I look at an image, or I look at a scene like this, the first thing I'm starting to look for is what is the major shape against the sky and what we would call the land, or in this case, buildings. And by getting this shape right, we've unlocked quite a bit of the composition. So I call this the keyhole. And that's the first drawing I really try to do. So let me just show you what I did in my sketchbook. Sorry, I just hit my camera there. Steady that back out. I've been known to be clumsy at times. So here we have that drawing basically transferred. So I'm taking this keyhole, and I'm just trying to judge if that feels good to me. The other thing is, this is made out of, if we look at the major components, we're dealing with rectangles. Here's a little triangle there, so you don't have to get deep into the idea of understanding perspective to pull this kind of drawing off. What I like to do, though, is look for the large geometric shapes. So say the steeple. That fits into a rectangle that has certain proportions. It has a length and a width. So if I can draw that simple rectangle, I've got the steeple there. The next thing would be then cutting across, choosing the rest of the church. And then I begin to carve away shape. So I always look at things like this, and I look at it in terms of geometry before I look at it in any terms of detail or an idea of what, if I'm going to get something right or not. It's just, until you understand that base geometry, you're not going to get your proportions right, or you're going to get stuck, doing some detail work on windows over here where it probably doesn't need a lot of stuff, because you've got to ask yourself, what's the subject? And for me, it's going to be the way that light comes down and hits this church. And then I'm going to have light coming through some imagined open windows, but that'll be left up to the end when I can do some lifts. And then I just populate. So as an architect and an illustrator, especially, I used to do these kind of drawings and paintings extremely tight. And the problem I found there was, yes, it's descriptive, but there's nothing else to it. It just was a little rigid for me. And in trying to knock out the old illustrator's mentality of it has to be right, I went back to my sketchbook, and that's always been the place I've been able to draw loosely. And I think it's the perfect tool. If you have an easel and you set that up and you pull out a piece of paper and you tape that down and you start to look important and you start to feel important, then you're going to start to get a little nervous maybe and things like that. So I always say the less pressure you can put on yourself, the better. And so if it's a sketchbook, you're the person that decides who sees what you do in these books. I have private ones and then I have teaching ones. Private ones, I do a lot of writing and stuff like that. But again, this is mine. And I have one rule, which is no matter how good the painting is, I don't rip it out of the sketchbook. And in fact, you'll see on the other one, okay, things are starting to disappear for me here. So if you look at this, hey, there's a pretty nice painting. Well, there's a decent little painting on the back of that. So if I tore this page out, I have to figure out which one I'd want. So these are the things that never get sent to a juror to be pondered if they're good enough or what. These are mine. They stay mine. I don't sell them. And once you let go of that idea of having to be right or this being a precious thing, then I think you start to begin to push boundaries. So then I haven't been lazy all day or anything like that. I did a little sketch of this that we can now put some color on. So I've got all of the line work in that I need. And I do typically draw about this heavy, if not a little heavier. I like to see pencil lines underneath the painting. It really tells me a lot about what the artist is thinking about and the way they're constructing their drawings. So unless there are some questions, I was just going to go ahead and start working in these washes. Are we all right to do that? Or
Yes, and I have not seen any questions yet about your process or your work, but I do want to just remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Tana's going to help me monitor the chat so we announce all the questions or ask Iain all the questions, and I'd like everyone to stay on mute and put your questions in the chat, and then when Iain can talk and he's not concentrating on his painting, we'll ask those questions. And actually the first question, I have two questions, Iain, and one is what kind of paper, what kind of watercolor paper are you using? And is this your normal size?
Okay, that's a great one. This is Arch's 300-pound rough. And this is not my normal size. So I'm a little constrained with what I can do because of the, I've got a camera above me and then I've got one that faces me. So I want you to be able to see what's happening. I always say, if you're looking at a demo, watch the palette as much as you watch the paper. Size, I find, if you're trying to let go of detail, letting go or starting to do smaller paintings helps there, but you can get stuck there quite easily and get too comfortable with one size. So always try to mix that up a little bit. A very good piece of advice I heard once was, if you want to paint loosely, paint a very small painting with your biggest brush. And that just won't allow you to do to get involved. When I'm laying out my my drawings, I'll do this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of sort of scratches and stuff, but I find that gives a little more flavor to my paintings as well. And you'll see these more gestural lines happening in the foreground as well. But I know who my star is. There is going to be some strength here, tonally, that will help. And then the way I approach my paintings is I tend to go through 3 passes and look for ways to get out. Because if I give myself more than that, typically I am going to waste that time and do something that has it's not necessarily what I want to do. So I always listen to that little voice in the back of my head that says, as soon as I hear stop, I really think about things. The other thing to keep in mind, unless you're doing a demonstration, you don't have to be on a deadline with your paintings. Quite often, it's a great idea to just step away and, at least give it an overnight. So I'm taking a little Naples yellow, and to that, I'm going to add some violet.
Ian, I have another question for you. Are
Sure.
you painting flat or on an easel?
Okay, I've just got a little architect's rule. So I'm probably at about, I don't know, 8% grade. Typically I paint about 15%, but if I do that, then this is going to do that, which it gets really hard for you to see. So I am using gravity, but not in the same way that I might.
Another question is, what is the pencil weight that you use?
Okay, this is just a regular HB.
And your palette type, can you talk about the palette that you're using?
This is just a typical Holbein. I have about 3 or 4 different palettes. I don't tend to use my specially nice brass palettes in these kind of demonstrations because people think that the palette has something to do with what's going on, and it really doesn't. I know a lot of people that work in the there's a little Mission palette. I forget the exact name, but you can pick it up for $15. And it's a gasketed palette, and that works great. As an illustrator, I painted for 10, 15 years professionally with using a porcelain plate. So it doesn't, I would say your paper is probably the most important thing, quickly followed by your choice of paints. I use typically or mainly Daniel Smith, but there are certain ones like this. My burnt sienna is always going to be a Winsor & Newton. And for a long time, Daniel Smith did not make lavender and things like that. So I had to get that elsewhere. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating everything I need for the first wash. I like to go through and create what I call the mother wash, which is the way that I tie everything together. So the really important thing I have to keep in mind here are where all my saved whites are going to be, because I'm not very big on using masking. That's just a personal choice. And I just like the way a natural edge from your brush looks on the paper. So, and we've got to think in terms of value. Your lightest lights go in first, and then you put on something stronger, and that pushes that back. So getting the sense of distance is really, it's set from the beginning. If you don't keep that in mind and you push your sky or something like that too heavy, then that's going to force you to make all the next moves with too strong of a tone. And then you'll lose that nice glow. So I'm always thinking in those sorts of terms. And then I'll have something, I've got a nice little go-to medium dark that I use, which is French ultramarine, alizarin crimson. And so I can let that go violet or a little more to the blue shade, depending on what I'm doing. Now there's going to be a lot of limestone in this, so I'll probably let that go a little to the violet side. Now this color is too electric, so I'm going to take burnt sienna and neutralize that just a little bit. So I definitely wouldn't call myself a colorist. I have no problem with color, but I don't feel the need to get too bright too quickly. And so I'll start at the top, and then just start to bring this down. I do need one little fella. There's a nice red brick building. So I'll show you again. This guy. So I'll just get a little light red. It doesn't need, again, it doesn't need to be very strong. But there's some really nice oranges and stuff coming off of that. And then you take a deep breath and begin. Now look at those marks. This is what rough paper will do. I haven't stretched this, it's just taped down. And so it lets you do these wonderful brush strokes with these ragged edges that I enjoy very much. And that just lets me play a little bit, but then I can come in and soften those. I want this to be lit, so I do know that I need to get the blue up to the steeple. And I can also drop in some fairly strong colors. I just want to watch out for making too much of a pattern with my clouds. So this is me just using clear water. I know that's the shade side of the church. And I'm just softening that because I know this building on this side is going to be darker. But I'll also paint through some buildings that I think I want to push further in the background. So as a general rule, things that are in the distance tend to be bluer and less defined. And as things come towards you, they get warmer and more detailed. Now, all rules are meant to be broken, but you kind of have to figure out the rules before you do. So I'm looking at these nice little negative shapes, and I'm going to knock a few of those off. Still like that. May get a little deeper blue. While this is wet, one of the nice things about Arches 300 is you really can continue to work it because the paper's so thick. So I'm bringing that down. And I do work with a bead, meaning that I'm allowing, you can see it collecting here. That's typically, this is just the vehicle that allows me to control where the water's going, where the color's going as I move down the page. I'm going to take some burnt sienna and I'm just going to drop a little bit of it in the sky. The wonderful thing about watercolor is if it looks right when you're putting it down, it's going to be wrong because it's going to dry much lighter. So something that is going to work for you should be a little bit scary in terms of its depth or its tone. And I was going to bring up, I'm not sure whose painting that was, that I was introduced with. It is a painting that I did, but that I didn't paint that one. That's one of my DVDs. I said, that's someone else's painting. Mine's a little bit different. So again, if I know that shadows are going to come in, anything's going to be darker, I'm not overly concerned with letting colors bleed into one another. And if you see my brush doing these sort of moves like that, this little dance that I do, that's me just playing with shape and seeing what my brush does versus whether or not I decide to keep it in the painting, I guess. Another thing, never let a line tell you where to put your brush. We all have many chances in every painting to make some decisions. I get this a little stronger in here because I know I'm going to do a lift. So it's a rather unique and difficult thing to do as far as listening to your painting and speaking at the same time. But over the years, I've taught myself that particular skill. In all honesty, I used my dogs to do it. And I would sit them down and I would talk to them about my painting while I did it. And they would turn their heads. And none of them are any good at painting, by the way. So see how I'm grabbing all of this and starting to let things go together. But notice how striking that light is just on the first pass. And again, I can use that kind of speed stroke to my advantage in suggesting detail. So the less I pigeonhole myself now, the happier I'm going to be. The more options I give myself now, the happier I'll be. So it seems that there's a lot of, and let me move this light. We're getting a little bit of, getting a little more reflection than I like. And I'm treating this very much like a sketch. So, and I tend to say this little number quite a bit is, if your sketch is good enough, you can walk away from it at almost any time. Which in turn, when you're doing a live demo, is a good excuse to get yourself maybe out of a jam here and there. And if you haven't tried demoing and talking at the same time, I highly suggest it. So we've got these nice warms interacting with our blues. I'm going to have some trees in here, but I tell you, I got a lot of problems with green. We just have never seen eye to eye. So I am going to make some decisions about my trees at a later date, or well, later in the painting. So just adding a little bit of raw sienna to this mixture to keep that light coming through. And these little ragged edges are going to do things for me. If I'm good, you get a little bit of that dark, and I'm just gonna, one of the reasons I like these flat weld Holbeins is I can have a nice bright sienna here, but then I can begin to dirty it up on another end so we can start to play with some tone. And it may sound counterproductive, but in these stages of a painting, the less you get involved with being right, and the more you can just listen to what might be important, the better off you're going to be. I'm going to change to a somewhat smaller brush here. So cars in the distance are super easy. It's just like boats or anything. They're just shapes. So I'm using shape to trick the eye and make you think, you know, since we're looking at a road, make you think that there are cars there, whereas I'm just painting shape or around it. I can zoom in a little bit if you'd like. So you see. Now, I do want some tone on that part of the street. Right now, I'm painting around one of my light areas where I want the I want that sort of canyon-like feel of light coming through buildings. And I think just for fun, I'm going to give this a little spritz with, I've just got a little Holbein spray bottle. Back out. Things can get awful scary if you allow them to. Again, that's why most of my workshops, we do what I call warm-ups, meaning that it's just like stretching if you're an athlete or something like that. Or before you hear an orchestra or any live music for that matter, you're going to hear the band warming themselves up and getting used to, are getting loose so they can play well. And I keep reminding myself I have to go all over and I need to keep my eye on everything as it's moving. So look at what happened in the sky. Remember I said, if it looks too dark, it's probably right. So what I've set myself up for is within that blue sky, I've actually got these little bits of burnt sienna working through it that allow me to then have these edges that bloom a little bit.
So Iain, can you talk a little bit about your brushes?
Yes, so these are Escoda. I'm using Escoda Perla number 10 right now. It's a synthetic brush. And it has a very fine point, which is why I like to use it. I am really bad to my brushes. I'm rough on them. So I wouldn't know what to do with a Series 7 Kolinsky if you gave it to me, or I want it in something. I'd end up ruining it. So I'm always a little, I always carry 3 or 4 of these because once I break the tip on that, then I throw it away or it becomes a lift brush. And I grab a new one and go because they're not that expensive, especially if you're talking about Kolinsky's. I have a feeling that I have got a dog outside that's going to bark momentarily.
So do you, are all your brushes Escoda, or was your other bigger brush?
That was an Escoda Ultimo, which is a mop.
Okay.
And then this is an Escoda. This isn't actually a Kolinsky, but it's 10 years old. So you see it has no point. And then I'll use flats and stuff here and there. It just depends on really on what I'm wanting to do.
So you primarily use synthetic.
Yes. And that's I mean, I'm not out here to guilt you guys into anything. But my wife is a big animal rights activist, and we very silly, on my part, we watched a brush making show on some channel, I can't remember, and they were talking about Kolinsky and the fact that it's endangered and, you know, it's fur. And she looked at me and said, "You don't have any of those, do you?" And I bashfully looked away and not anymore, I guess. So, but in my experience, which is over the last, I've been using these for about, I don't know, it's been a while. The synthetics have just gotten much better. So here we are starting to get close to this dumpster, which is going to let me, remember what I said about never miss an opportunity to do something very simple with one color? So that'll hold its edge well enough for me. And then these are all workmen, so I can grab like some bright yellows and things like that, or even an orange if I want. And then the cabs in New York. So that's all still workable. There we go. So now this is what I call getting to the catching everything and pulling it together, meaning that I've made most of my major moves and I've got my light the way I want it. So see that just nice little drag of the brush there. That's what, so that edge, if I tried over and over and over again, I couldn't repeat it, you know? So I'll be protective of that, meaning that I'm not going to mother bear it, but I know that that's a unique brushstroke. And then I'm going to just start running a graded wash. So I'll start adding some neutral tint to this mixture. Let these little ragged edges, you know, when watercolor gives that to you, be grateful. And I'm going to keep on getting, so look at how thick that paint's getting now. So there's our first wash. Rather successful, I think. I'm going to put in some shadow underneath the, what's it called? Dumpster. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of paper towel and take off this extra. Because this paint will hang out on that tape, and then I don't know about you guys, but I will grab it and drag it everywhere. So I'm gonna now, Arches 300 rough. I can roll this stuff around and really start to work on getting some granulation. And then I have this guy that if I use, you know, the really nice sort of just spray, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for it to kind of spit a little bit. And if I just let that sit, you'll see right here, there's just a little bit of texture starting to happen. So there's our first wash, and we see the light, you know, everything's working to a degree. I managed to make it through without killing it, which is always, when you're demoing, it's a great, you know, that's a good feeling. And so I am going to
It's really
mute myself.
spectacular, Iain.
Thank you. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm out of here.
From my point of view, it's a really spectacular first wash.
Well, that's the mother wash that ties the whole painting together. And that's why I do it. So the next part, we're just going to start to give things some shape. The last thing we do is put value and shadow in, which gives that shape form. So let me mute because this is loud.
So while Iain is drawing and muting, some folks ask questions, and might be a good time to, if you have another question or you don't feel like your question got answered, to put something in the chat box.
I'll mention once I'm using the hair dryer, I can't hear any questions.
No, we're just talking, letting you do your thing.
Okay, great.
So Lorraine, you're asking about the name of the brushes, and what I heard Iain say is that he uses primarily synthetic brushes, and the name of the brush he gave us was a Skoda Perla.
So they've just got a terrific point, you know. I could do 90% of all my paintings with these two brushes.
So it's a 10 and a 14?
They're both 14. So this is a 14 mop,
Okay.
and that's a 14 pointed round. And they just, and of course I go out and then I'll carry 90 brushes with me like an idiot. I tell people, you know, pack light and do all of that, but I'm just as guilty as the next person of not.
Do you use a hair dryer when you're painting alone in your studio and not doing a demo?
Yes.
Okay.
I've had a lot of friends that say, you know, you're frying your color. It's killing it. Don't do it. But I've been using a hairdryer for, well, I guess I've been in business as a professional for 22 years now. I've never come across a major problem with that. So again, that's just now beginning to step forward. And yes, the small brush, this, and that are all different size. That's an 8, that's a 10, and that's a 14, and they're all Escoda Prolins. I really hope you can't hear my dog eating in the next room. His manners are atrocious. So what happens with this mother wash is the next washes that I put on, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I don't have to deal with a lot of things. And that's one of the reasons I like this quite a bit. So that allows me also to begin to do some little detailing if I want. Being aware of how much water is on your brush is extremely important. And having the dexterity, if you can do that to draw with your brush, also just helps lend that sense of a little bit of dynamic to your brush strokes. So I mean, what you want ideally, I would say, practice doing sketches without a pencil to use your brush. And you see that all starting to push stuff back, but this is our star. So what I want to do is I want to orchestrate this pass. And it's going to come down here. It's going to come into the trees and through, and then back up this building. And that'll be a way of gathering the shadow that allows the light to really be center stage. So the more you can anticipate and react rather than say, oh, what happened, and try to fix things. Generally speaking, the better your paintings will turn out and the more clearly they will be understood to me doing two things at once in my head. The clearer your statement will be. I mean, when I'm teaching, I like to show people this kind of stuff, but I also am very, it's very important to me that you understand that this is the way I do it. What interests me as an instructor is bringing out how you do this and how you would make these translations. And that's the wonderful thing is as an instructor, watching students begin to make their own decisions and paint in their own style. There's just nothing quite like it. All right, that doesn't have enough. So this is just the same. These are almost all the same mixtures. I'm just going a little bit deeper on them. Now I'm going to ask you, once we're through this little one, is to look at the quality of light we have right now. Once I get this shadow on, have another gander. You know, this is a highly ornate Gothic church spire. But it's pretty amazing how little tone you need to really get that point across. And that's where I always warn people, you know, don't kill it from the start. Let value do its job, then make adjustments. So that begs the question, so are you just making some of this up? Of course I am. And that's the beauty to me, is if I paint in this style, no two paintings of mine are ever going to look the same. More importantly, the more I do this, the more I begin to teach myself about understanding light. So my illustrations have changed. They are, I think, better. My clients seem to think the same thing. So let me.
And since you're an architect, how did you train yourself to go from the level of detail that is required of you to do a formal architectural illustration to translate that into your watercolor style? That
It
makes
was my sketchbook. I mean, that really was the thing that opened my eyes when I realized I was just painting these sort of glorified illustrations. I stopped doing anything except for working in my sketchbook for a little while. And that really helped.
help to loosen you up.
Yeah, if there are no consequences and you can't ruin it, which, let's be honest, you can ruin it. But if you're not, if any painting you've got is not, it's not done, it's not good, it's not, worst thing you can do for yourself is start to figure out names or title your paintings when you're at this stage, then you're going to, typically I find people will become protective because they've done something they like and then they don't want to ruin it. And this is exactly when you do not want to be painting that way. You want to be painting with gesture and an emotion all the way through. So see what that blue does. There's no substitute for a confident brushstroke. That I found anyway. So this is going to cast. I don't want to get into cast shadow too much, but I will. I will soften that. So that's, I just put water, clear water there. But you notice something similar. I hope, maybe not. Is we're just putting layers on and things are beginning to emerge that are quite pleasing, actually. And then that's back to the big brush trick here. Here's my trees coming in. See any green? No. It's not that I don't hate green, but in this kind of thing, it can get a little, can begin to compete. You just have to be, I'm not saying don't use it at all. I would never say that. But I'm saying when you do, be, keep that in mind that you're using a powerful color and one that can be, let's say, out of tune quite easily. So there's one of my awnings. We've got to keep that for light. So I'm really looking at shape right now. Put some branching in there. Then I'm going to take some undersea green. And to that, I'm going to add just a little bit of burnt sienna.
What was the green again, Ian?
It's undersea green. So
Okay.
it's a nice sort of seaweedy color. It's a good strong dark. And again, I don't use a lot of tube greens. This is one I like, and it plays really well with what's it called? Burnt sienna. And if there's one color that I go for all the time, it's burnt sienna,
So Ian, do you organize your palette in a particular way?
Yeah, so you see that it's rectangular. So what I'm doing, I've got my darks, and that's a burnt umber moving through my blues. French Ultra is going to be the cooler, or sorry, is the warmer. Cobalt's the cooler. Then I've got cobalt and burnt sienna is maybe my favorite mixture. And so I have those together, and then we start to move through the reds into up here, experimental colors. I think that's soda light. I have no idea what that is. But then I've added lavender, and this is actually verditor blue. And then that's phthalo turquoise, which is crazy unless you really need it. And moving back into the greens, that's a Chinese white. And then I've got my cad orange, new gamboge. I think that's Quinn gold, and a lemon yellow, raw sienna, Naples yellow. So it's a color wheel, and it's kind of a condensed, but I do certainly use favor a palette that's based more in earth tones. So to myself right now, I'm saying, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. It's all going to be okay, man. It's look at the shapes that you're making. And quite often at this point, my drawing is, it's obscured. So it really is much more about shape than anything else. So I'm just going to try and get this down to my people. And I'm going to just paint around them. Then I'm going to go back up. And then I'm going to start picking out some details on these cars and things like that. And I find it quite common that people get too involved in trying to create a car when a fairly simple brushstroke will do what you need. It's just that more is less, or less is more. And there we have a nice work truck for these gentlemen. I'll put a little reflection on the windshield. How's that? That looks pretty good. I'm going to look for ways to, again, I'm looking for ways to tie my shadows together. That's actually pretty good. This is useful. So not a, I'm looking at this, down here on my desk, but I can also look over. I've got another monitor so I can see it from another angle. So I don't really need to play down here. That'll be the last steps. But I do need to start to plan for some of my mid darks. So again, French ultramarine, alizarin crimson. That got very purple, so I'll just add some more blue. And let me give you a little preview. This is that's just an electric color. But if I take some burnt sienna, it just tones it down. Now that's a great color if you want to use it, but it tends not to work for me in cityscapes. Color I find to be a very, very personal choice. And then don't forget the opportunities that you have with drawing paper. So we've shaped out those trees just a little bit. Right. I am going to get some neutral tint and begin to play with some of these windows. But again, I don't want them stealing from my star. Whenever just a brush stroke will do, use it. I'm going to get some cobalt teal and mix that with that's that brick red. So if I have, we'll say that these are copper. Soffits. So just that detailing does a little bit. Now let's get a little fun fella. Just a regular palette knife. And I can't control this, you know, it delivers a line, but it doesn't deliver one that I'm absolutely in control of. And if you know me, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So there's just enough to say window without me holding you by the hand and saying, this is a window. Watch out. That gets very addictive, but see how effective that can be? We've got that guy kind of messing around. I'm really not worried. I'm gonna, when I do my lifts, I'm gonna be fine. So now I want to put a little bit of the sky color back in some of these windows so they're reflecting, but not too much. All right. And then I'm going to shape this water tower. I'm going to get some neutral tint and give my church some really light detail. But again, if I do too much of that, I'm going to flatten the painting, you know. We have traffic lights. And again, that's pretty typical me. It's just, I didn't paint the whole thing. I didn't see any need to. These are all things that, so in a demo is a different beast. When I'm teaching, things move at a much more, well, a less frenetic pace, I think. Demos are more performance oriented to me anyway. And they're, you know, basically, you know, you're in a room with a lot of people, it's been a long day, and you're trying to keep people from going to sleep. All right, there's some more of our workmen. Maybe the truck has some lights on it or something, so I can get some really thick paint there, and that'll sit. All right. Got to do one more. Actually, let me pull this up and do something upside down. We're going to make it on time. I say very hopefully. And that's just going to separate that building a little bit from the one around it. But I need to straighten that line out. And this is where this dull brush, I can just get it and I can make these shapes. And they they just tend to work. So let me get neutral tint. Clear water in between two fairly strong marks of neutral tint. And this is where I do start to knuckle drag a little bit. So the scaffolding that holds up these awnings, construction awnings, is perfect for this. We can make, if we want, diagonals. We don't need that getting too interesting. Okay, so I need to dry for just a moment.
Okay.
I always check dryness with the back of my hands because, there are oils on my finger. Now let's try and do something that is, I always say, give yourself every opportunity to ruin it. So just for your guys' purposes, this is the brush holder that I take out with me. So it's got everything you've seen pretty much. I just have 3 of everything. That is a Scotta Perla that in a different life was pointed and then became a scrubbing brush. There's a ray of light. Now these have to be the same, right? Because the sun's not going to cast things that go that way and that way. It's coming one way down. And then we could even, if we want, we could have the sun glinting off. Again, watch out. This can get, you can overdo that. As soon as your mind says, that's enough, stop lifting, right? This is working out pretty well. So I think we're even going to have time for some questions and answering. Oops. That's the hardest thing I have is staying within frame. Maybe there's some kind of banners over here, I don't know. Or there's street lights, what have you. Now, I'm going to get a nice little bit of red. I'm going to make a banner here. And I'm going to repeat it. Now we just have to play roundup. So I'm going to go to my Cobalt. And I'm going to put in people behind these people that are in shadow. These guys aren't in the dumpster, but that's something to be aware of at least, right? You don't necessarily want that to look like you got a hot tub party going on in your dumpster. Remember what I said about this edge. Very, very important. So I'm just going to take clear water. And I'm going to keep moving it up until I get into that. Now I'm going to take neutral tint. I'll let that hang out for just a moment. I think we could use a little more going on, some connection here. Yeah. And then let me just refer you back. We got these nice lead-ins on the street. So I'm just going to use the point. And that'll get darker. Now there's another way to do this where you just use clear water and that will actually move the paint away from it. So you can choose how you do that. You can make things go darker by scraping, or you can move the color away by adding clear water. Now I just need to ask myself a couple of questions about whether or not I'm really done. Sort of speed painting, but you get the idea.
And what red did you use for the banners? Was it the same one?
It was CAD red light.
Thanks.
I'm going to put a little bit of that stuff across the street. The only thing to be wary of when you're using this is not to rub the enamel off your palette. And then there's just a couple of little fiddly things I want to do. And get the eye back there. Now, if I had a lot of time, I usually like to add a little texture to my brick. So I'd come in and begin to do this kind of thing. Kind of like what I did in the sky. And that just makes your brick look a little weathered. But again, you can, so that's too strong. So I've got to just take water. Whenever I do something that I think is too strong, just add water. There's my dog again.
We appreciate having your dog with us.
He's an elderly rescue, which if you haven't done that, I highly recommend it. I'm just dropping some water in there. I'm going to let the pup in. Come on. There you go, buddy. Come on. Ozzy, come on. Good boy. And hopefully there was something when I did that little spritz, there's a little something going on there that, well, not quite as much as I wanted, but it's okay. But there's some darks I could do here. I could maybe look like this guy's less of, you know, he's not really sort of skipping. But that's all the kind of stuff I call tuning up rather than really being worried about what's going on. I'll hit the front of that truck one more time. You could add some windows if you want. Storefront. But overall, I'm liking that effect. Try this stuff out on scratch paper. You know, most of these, like try these kind of strokes on scratch paper. It's never good to give something, you know, experiment on something that you may that may mean something to you. But of course, I've just spent the last hour or so saying it can't mean anything to you until you call it quits. And so now my alarm bells are starting to ring. Get some nice, deep, clean CAD red. got some over there. So maybe this guy gets a tie. I don't know. Or a huge dot. Or maybe it's just a yellow, red jacket. Maybe that person has something going on too. It's less about the detail to me than it is about the shape. That guy doesn't have pants on. Let's rectify that. An arm or two might help. I could do some things with gouache, but these little subtle things I'm doing with the reds, I think are more effective than anything I could do with gouache right now. Just gives it a little bit of texture. But then again, you've always got to be wary of what gets texture, what gets interesting versus where you want your eye to be directed to. So let me just pull this guy off. And that'll start to give you the, I don't have a mat to put this under.
It's fabulous, Iain.
But you start to get a little idea of it. And then just don't get too involved in detail. Choose where that goes, plan that ahead. So if we go back to my sketch, it was all about this, and that's where all my detail went. There's a little bit there. One little, if you can say something with a brush stroke, very simply, I find that to be a much more effective statement than something that may be belabored, or you certainly when I notice things being overworked and things like that, it's just so nice to see people A, knowing when to stop, and then B, actually doing it. Those are two very different things.
Well, in our chat, we have a lot of some wonderful comments. Appreciate your time and many pearls of wisdom. Really fabulous demo, and how beautiful and detailed the chapel looks without spending a lot of time on detail.
Yeah, that's simple brush strokes. That's the big idea, is letting a brush stroke say something that it's implied, but it's not stated. So you're actually becoming involved in that and seeing for yourself the way that you want to react to it, rather than me saying, hey, look at that, and it's only meant to be interpreted this way. So I find that when you do that, you tend to be a little more honest. And in my book, it's always, the more of you can get into your painting, the better. So these are fun little things we can try. And if you're interested in it, learning more, certainly I will be out your way next year, God willing. And then after that, I'm going to Scotland for 6 weeks, I think, and visiting family that I haven't seen in way too long. So
One last
Uh-huh.
question for you right this second is, do you use regular masking tape?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's Scotch and my suggestion, this is 3/4 inch. Sometimes I use full inch. Don't buy 5 or 6 rolls of this stuff at a time, especially if you don't paint a lot, because this has just happened to me over and over. They'll go bad. So they'll get all stuck and you can't use them anyway. So I only buy 2 or 3 rolls at a time, and that's for me. So and I do quite a bit of painting. So and yeah, it's the 300-pound. I've been varnishing watercolors lately, and it's kind of neat. I've got one right here that I can show you.
Could you also, is there a way for us to view your show online? And could you talk a minute about the show that you,
Yeah.
that show?
So that's a little varnished watercolor. So if I turn it, you can maybe start to see some of the varnish. But this has got 8 layers. And if you're framing up a big show and you don't have to clean glass or worry about getting your beard hair into, the mat and stuff like that, it is wonderful. So yes, they had an opening Thursday night in New York at the painting center in Chelsea. And there were quite a few of us. Lauren McCracken curated it. And it was sponsored by Golden Artist Materials. And so they provided all the varnish, and then I actually used Matt Bird's technique. We're good friends, and his attention to detail is really good, and he likes to geek out on that kind of stuff, whereas I can be a little impatient, I guess. So it was called Breaking Glass, and from what I hear, it was well received. And there were, I want to say 10 artists. And at the last minute, I couldn't go because of my Achilles tendon. I tore that, and so and there's no point in being in New York if you can't walk. But yeah, they had a good turnout as far as I understand, and I'm looking forward to seeing much more of that, because the results are really. I took a painting, just pull out something for you here. It gets a little weird when you pull out something that is worth quite a lot to you and hopefully someone else. But so here's a full sheet or a half sheet painting of mine, which is that level of detail, and then going in and varnishing it. It took quite a lot of experimenting, and then I had to just go for it at some point, because it's really scary when you start to change the surface of something you put that much time in. And I used a satin varnish with an isolation coat, which means and then another satin on top, which means in 100 years, you can come and take those 2 layers of varnish off and clean the painting and then revarnish it, and it would look good as new. I do apply varnish to the sides, and I affix mine with a gloss gel medium. So you put that on the back of the painting, and then I have, you can see, yeah, it's not in there, Baltic birch panels. And you just, when you have something acrylic and you put it under pressure, that makes it stick. So, and I'm looking at the comments here. An isolation coat is just it's a protective coat between layers of varnish that allow you to clean back to it without affecting the painting. So you have to varnish a few times, then apply your isolation coat, wait 24 hours, and then put your final layers of varnish on. And then it's got, as long as you're taking care of it in the way that you would an oil and trying to keep it out of direct sunlight and things like that, you're dealing with basically the same archival amount of time, the same protection that you would get on an oil. And I like that. I like being able to push watercolor, and I love being able to see a painting with nothing between you and the glass. So, by the way, I did a lot of these little ones in preparation for the bigger ones. So.
Thank you so much, Iain. This has just been so much wonderful information and just such an inspiring demo. Wonderful tease for next June when you actually do get to come to California and see us.
I'm looking forward to it. I would like to get out of town. That'd be nice. And I mean, I'm happy to answer any more questions, anything like that. If anyone has them, and if not, it's, have a great rest of your